They despised her looks, until the Mafia boss saw her again after her transformation, stunned everyone. They despised her looks, every single one of them, the whispers behind her back, the cruel laughter that followed her down hallways, the way people looked through her as if she were invisible. But what none of them knew, what none of them could have possibly predicted, was that the most powerful man in the city had once made her a promise, and he never forgot a promise. They despised her looks, until the Mafia boss saw her again after her transformation stunned everyone. This is that story. The rain fell in thin, relentless sheets over the streets of South Brooklyn on a Tuesday evening in late October. The kind of rain that didn't soak you all at once, but crept into your bones slowly, making everything heavier. The streetlights cast pale orange circles on the wet pavement, and the smell of wet concrete and fried food from the corner bodega mixed together in a scent that Elena Moretti had known her entire life. She was 23 years old, 5'4", with dark hair she kept pulled back in a loose bun, oversized glasses that were always slightly crooked, and a face that, according to most people who had ever met her, was simply forgettable. Not ugly, they would say, just nothing, plain. The kind of face you passed on the subway and forgot before the next stop. But forgettable was generous compared to what some people said. Elena walked quickly, her sneakers slapping against the wet sidewalk, a plastic bag of groceries in each hand. She kept her head down, not because she was shy, though she was, but because she had learned long ago that keeping your head down in this neighborhood was how you survived. South Brooklyn wasn't what the tourists saw. It wasn't the brownstones and artisan coffee shops that had taken over the north side. Down here, the buildings were older, the paint was peeling, and the people who ran the streets didn't show up on any business registry. Down here, the Conti family had controlled everything for 3 generations. Elena turned the corner onto Myrtle Avenue and nearly collided with a group of young men standing outside the barber shop. She recognized them immediately. Nico, Sal and Tommy, all in their mid-20s, all wearing the kind of expensive jackets that didn't match their supposed incomes. They worked for Marco Conti, the underboss of the Conti organization, running errands, collecting debts, and making sure everyone on the block remembered who owned these streets. Nico was the first to notice her. He nudged Sal with his elbow and grinned. "Yo, look who it is! Elena the Ghost." Sal laughed, that sharp, barking laugh that always made Elena's stomach tighten. "Ghost is right. I swear every time I see her, I forget what she looks like the second she walks away." Tommy didn't laugh. He just stared at her with that flat, uninterested expression that somehow felt worse than the jokes, like she wasn't even worth the energy of cruelty. Elena kept walking, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on the cracked sidewalk ahead. She didn't respond. She never responded. What was the point? Nico called after her. "Hey, Elena, you ever think about, I don't know, trying? Like even a little. Maybe some makeup or something. You could be at least a 5 if you put in some effort." Their laughter followed her down the block, like a stray dog that wouldn't stop trailing. She gripped the grocery bags tighter and walked faster. When she reached the narrow brick building where she lived, she climbed 4 flights of stairs to the apartment she shared with her mother, Rosa. The hallway smelled like old cooking oil and bleach, and the fluorescent light on the 3rd floor flickered constantly, casting strange shadows that danced on the walls. Eleanor pushed open the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that doubled as a living room, and a bathroom with a shower. That only worked half the time, but it was clean. Rosa Moretti kept it spotless even on her worst days, and lately, most days were her worst days. Rosa sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her, a stack of medical bills spread out like a losing hand of cards. She was 54 but looked 70. Years of working double shifts at the garment factory, then the cleaning company, then the laundromat, had taken everything from her body and left behind a thin, fragile woman who moved slowly and breathed with a faint wheeze that never quite went away. "Elena, is that you?" Rosa's voice was soft, tired, but warm. Always warm. "Yeah, Ma. I got the groceries." Elena set the bags on the counter and started putting things away. She didn't mention the encounter with Nico and his friends. She never did. Rosa had enough to worry about. "Did you eat?" Rosa asked, starting to stand. "Sit down, Ma. I'll make something." "I'm not helpless, Elena." "I know, but let me do it." They had this exchange almost every night. It was their ritual, their quiet dance of love and stubbornness. Elena heated up soup and made sandwiches, and they ate together at the small table while the radiator clanked and hissed in the corner. After dinner, Elena washed the dishes and then retreated to her room. It was barely bigger than a closet. A twin bed, a desk with an old laptop, and a bookshelf crammed with novels and textbooks. Elena had graduated from a community college 2 years ago, with a degree in business administration, but the degree hadn't opened any doors. She had applied to dozens of jobs, gone to interviews where people smiled politely and never called back. She currently worked part-time at a dry cleaning shop 6 blocks away, pressing shirts and sorting garments for $8.50 an hour. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. She sat on her bed and opened her laptop. On the screen was a folder she had titled The Plan. Inside were spreadsheets, research notes, business ideas, and a personal development journal she had been keeping for over a year. Elena had been quietly, methodically working on transforming her life. Not just her appearance, though that was part of it, but everything. She had been studying nutrition, exercise science, personal styling, public speaking, and most importantly, business strategy. She had a vision for a small consulting firm that would help local businesses in underserved neighborhoods develop better financial practices. She had the knowledge. She had the plan. What she didn't have was money, connections, or anyone who believed she could do it. She closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of Italy. She thought about what Nico had said. "You ever think about trying?" The truth was she thought about it every single day, but trying cost money she didn't have. A decent wardrobe, contact lenses, a haircut that wasn't done. In the kitchen with Rosa's sewing scissors. These things required resources that Elena simply could not afford. And beyond the surface, the deeper transformation she was working toward, the one that would change her life completely, that required something even more scarce than money. It required opportunity. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she lay in that tiny room listening to the rain hit the window, was that opportunity was closer than she thought. And it was. Going to come from the last person anyone would have expected. Across the borough, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the Manhattan skyline, a man named Dominic Conti sat in a leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at a photograph. The photograph was old, slightly faded, creased at the corners from being handled too many times. It showed 2 children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the steps of a church in South Brooklyn. The girl had dark hair in messy pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. The boy had sharp features and serious eyes even then. On the back of the photograph, written in a child's handwriting, were 2 words: best friends. Dominic Conti was 35 years old and had been the head of the Conti organization for almost a decade, since his father's imprisonment on racketeering charges. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, and a face that was handsome in a severe, angular way. He had the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet when he entered, not because people feared him, though many did, but because there was something magnetic about his stillness. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. He looked at the photograph and took a slow sip of whiskey. The girl in the picture was Elena Moretti. He hadn't seen her in almost 15 years. Life had pulled them in violently different directions. His into the world of power, influence, and dangerous alliances. Hers into the quiet struggle of poverty and invisibility. But he had never forgotten her. She was the only person who had ever been kind to him without wanting something in return. When they were children, before the weight of the family name had settled on his shoulders, Elena had been his anchor. She had shared her lunch with him when his father forgot to pack one. She had sat with him in the hospital waiting room when his mother was sick. She had told him, with the absolute certainty that only a child can have, that he was going to be okay. He had made her a promise then. He remembered it with perfect clarity. They had been sitting on those church steps, and she had been crying because some kids at school had called her names. He had put his arm around her and said, in his most serious 9-year-old voice, "Don't listen to them, Elena. One day I'm going to make sure nobody ever makes you cry again." He set the photograph down on the table beside his glass and picked up his phone. He dialed a number. "Victor, I need you to find someone for me. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we tell stories here that will hook you from start to finish, and what comes next in this story will leave you speechless. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss a chapter." Victor Salerno was Dominic's right hand, not in the violent sense that movies like to portray, but in the practical, organizational sense. Victor was 51 years old, a former accountant who had stumbled into the Conti world through a series of circumstances he preferred not to discuss, and had proven himself invaluable through his intelligence, discretion, and absolute loyalty. He wore reading glasses, kept his grey hair neatly combed, and looked more like a high school principal than a man who managed the financial operations of one of Brooklyn's most powerful organizations. "Who am I looking for?" Victor asked, his voice calm and measured as always. "Eleanor Moretti. She grew up on Myrtle Avenue. Her mother is Rosa Moretti. Last I heard, they were still in the old neighborhood." There was a pause. Victor knew better than to ask why. When Dominic wanted to explain, he explained. When he didn't, you simply did what was asked. "I'll have something for you by morning," Victor said. "Thank you, Victor." Dominic ended the call and looked out at the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered like a circuit board, millions of lights, millions of lives, all moving in their own orbits. Somewhere out there, in a small apartment in South Brooklyn, was the girl who had once shared her peanut butter sandwich with a kid whose father was too busy running an empire to remember his son needed to eat. True to his word, Victor had a full report by the next morning. He presented it to Dominic over coffee in the penthouse kitchen, reading from a tablet. Elena Moretti, 23, lives with her mother Rosa at the same address on Myrtle Avenue, 4th floor. Rosa has chronic respiratory issues, years of working in factories with poor ventilation. Elena graduated from community college with a degree in business administration, top of her class, but hasn't been able to find professional employment. She works part-time at a dry cleaning shop. Income is minimal. They're behind on rent, and Rosa's medical bills are significant. Victor paused and looked up. She seems to live a very quiet life. No social media presence. No close friends that I could identify. From what I could gather, she's somewhat isolated. Dominic listened without expression, but inside something tightened. He remembered a girl full of light, full of warmth, a girl who could make anyone smile. The idea that life had reduced her to this, invisible, struggling, alone, was something he found deeply uncomfortable. Not because he was sentimental. Dominic Conti had long ago learned to keep his emotions in a lockbox, but there were certain debts that transcended the transactional nature of his world and the debt he owed. Elena Moretti was one of them. "There's something else," Victor said. "She has a business plan, detailed, well-researched. I found a printed copy during the background check, a consulting firm for local businesses in underserved areas, financial planning, growth strategy, community development. It's actually quite impressive." Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly, the equivalent in his emotional range of open surprise. "She always was the smartest person in any room," he said quietly. "She just never knew it." He stood and walked to the window. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting golden light across the city. "I want to help her," he said, "but I can't just show up. She wouldn't accept it." "What do you have in mind?" Victor asked. Dominic thought for a long moment. "There's a business development program, the one the foundation runs. We have a new cohort starting next month. I want her in it, full scholarship. But I don't want her to know it's coming from me. Not yet," Victor nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. One more thing, the dry cleaning shop she works at, who owns it?" Victor checked his tablet. "A man named Gerald Patterson. He's renting the space from one of our commercial properties. Make sure her employment situation improves. Better hours, better pay. I don't want it to look connected. Just make it happen." "Understood." As Victor left, Dominic sat back down and picked up the old photograph again. He traced the outline of the girls, face with his thumb. 15 years was a long time. He had become someone Elena might not recognize, someone the world feared and respected in equal measure. But somewhere beneath the tailored suits and the calculated calm, the boy who had made that promise on the church steps was still there, and he intended to keep it. 2 weeks later, Elena received a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, delivered to her mailbox between an electricity bill and a grocery store flyer. She almost threw it away, thinking it was junk mail. But something made her open it. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper with a letterhead she didn't recognize, the Conti Foundation for Community Development. The letter informed her that she had been selected for their inaugural Business Accelerator program, a fully funded 6-month program that included business mentorship, professional development workshops, a personal image consulting package, and a seed investment of $50,000 upon successful completion. Elena read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. "What's wrong? What happened?" Rosa rushed in from the other room, her face tight with worry. Elena held up the letter, unable to speak. Rosa took it, read it slowly, her lips moving with each word. When she finished, she looked at her daughter with wide eyes. "Elena, this is real. I don't know. I don't know how they found me. I never applied for anything like this." Rosa sat down beside her on the floor, which was saying something because getting down and getting back up was a whole ordeal for her these days. She put her arm around her daughter. "Maybe someone out there saw what I've always seen," Rosa said softly. "That you are extraordinary." Eleanor wanted to believe it, but she had learned to be cautious with hope. Hope, in her experience, was a currency that always seemed to bounce. She spent the next 2 days researching the Conti Foundation. It was legitimate, a philanthropic arm of a larger business entity focused on community development in Brooklyn. The website was professional, the board of directors included respected community leaders, and the program was real. What she didn't find, because it was deliberately hidden, was that the foundation's primary funding came from Dominic Conti's personal fortune, and that her inclusion in the program had been specifically arranged by the man himself. She decided to accept. What did she have to lose? The program began on a Monday in November. The location was a renovated warehouse in Dumbo that had been converted into a sleek, modern workspace with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River, and the kind of minimalist furniture that somehow cost more than Eleanor's annual income. There were 12 participants in the cohort, all from different backgrounds, all with business ideas and dreams that had been stalled by lack of resources. Eleanor was the quietest among them. The first day was orientation. They met their mentors, received their schedules, and were given a tour of the facility. Elena moved through it all in a daze, touching the surfaces of desks and the spines of books as if to confirm they were real. At one point, she found herself standing alone in front of the window, looking out at the Brooklyn Bridge, and she whispered to herself, "Don't mess this up." The program was rigorous. 3 days a week, they attended workshops on everything from financial modeling to marketing strategy to public speaking. 2 days a week, they worked one-on-one with their assigned mentors. And then there was the personal development component, the part that would change Elena in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her personal development coach was a woman named Diane Chen, a former fashion editor turned life coach who had a gift for seeing people not as they were, but as they could be. Diane was in her 40s, impeccably dressed, with short, black hair, and a directness that was initially intimidating but ultimately liberating. At their first meeting, Diane studied Elena for a long moment. The oversized glasses, the shapeless clothes, the hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it was trying to escape her head. "Tell me something," Diane said. "When you look in the mirror, what do you see?" Elena shifted uncomfortably. "I don't really look in the mirror that much." "That's what I thought. We're going to change that. Not because there's anything wrong with you. I want to be very clear about that. But because how you present yourself to the world is a language, and right now you're not speaking. You're whispering, and the world doesn't hear whispers." Over the following weeks, Diane worked with Elena on what she called the full picture. It wasn't just about appearance, it was about posture, voice, eye contact, the way she entered a room, the way she held a conversation. But yes, appearance was part of it. Elena got contact lenses to replace her old glasses. She got a professional haircut. Her thick, dark hair, which she had been hiding in a bun for years, was cut into a layered, shoulder-length style that framed her face in a way that made her features suddenly come alive. She learned about clothes that fit properly, about colors that complemented her olive skin tone, about the subtle art of presenting yourself with confidence without sacrificing authenticity. The changes were gradual at first. A new jacket here, better posture there. But as the weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. Elena didn't just look different, she felt different. The transformation wasn't skin deep. It was as if the external changes were giving permission to something that had been locked inside her for years. Confidence. Not the loud, brash confidence that some people wore like armor, but a quiet, steady assurance that came from finally seeing herself clearly. Her business skills were sharpening too. Her mentor, a retired executive named James Holland, was consistently impressed by her analytical mind and her ability to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. "You have a gift, Elena," he told her during one of their sessions. "You understand people. You understand systems. That's rare." Elena smiled, something she was doing more often now. "I just pay attention," she said. "Most people don't. That's the gift." Meanwhile, Dominic Conti watched from a distance. Victor provided regular updates, careful to maintain the anonymity of Dominic's involvement. He reported on Elena's progress in the program, her growing confidence, her impressive performance in the workshops. He also, perhaps less professionally, noted that the young woman is becoming quite striking, if I may say so. Dominic had simply nodded and said nothing, but he had started driving through South Brooklyn more often than his business strictly required. It was during one of these drives in mid-December that he saw her for the first time in 15 years. Not in person, not yet. Victor had arranged for a photographer to take candid shots of the cohort during one of their workshop sessions, ostensibly for the Foundation's annual report. Among the photographs was one of Elena, standing at a whiteboard, mid-presentation, her eyes bright with intelligence and passion, her posture straight, her expression alive. She was wearing a fitted navy blazer over a white blouse, her dark hair falling in soft waves. Around her shoulders, she was, to put it simply, transformed. Dominic stared at the photograph for a long time. He felt something shift inside him, not just recognition, but something deeper and more complicated. The girl he had known was still there, in the warmth of her eyes and the slight tilt of her head, but she had become a woman, and that woman was extraordinary. He set the photograph down and closed his eyes. He needed to see her, not through reports and photographs, but face to face. But the timing had to be right. He was a patient man. He could wait. While Elena flourished in the program, her life in South Brooklyn remained unchanged in its challenges. She still lived in the same apartment. Rosa's health was not improving. The medical bills continued to pile up. And the men outside the barbershop on Myrtle Avenue still treated her as their personal source of amusement, though lately their comments had taken on a different tone. It was a Saturday afternoon in December when Elena walked past the barbershop after a session at the program. She had come straight from a workshop and was still wearing her new clothes, her hair down, her posture confident. She wasn't even thinking about Nico and his crew. Her mind was on a financial projection she was refining for her business plan, but they noticed her. Nico did a double take so obvious it was almost cartoonish. "Wait, Elena? Is that Elena?" Sal stepped forward, squinting. "No way. That's not her." "It is her," Tommy said, and for the first time, there was something in his voice that wasn't boredom. It was interest. Elena kept walking just as she always did, but this time she held her head up. Not to prove anything to them, she was past that. She held her head up because it was where her head belonged. "Yo, Elena," Nico called after her. "Hold up. You look amazing." Where you been hiding all this?" She didn't stop. She didn't turn around. She just kept walking, and for the first time in her life, the silence she left behind wasn't the silence of someone invisible. It was the silence of someone who had left an impression. That night, she sat with Rosa at the kitchen table and told her about the day. Rosa listened with tears in her eyes, not because of the story about the men at the barbershop, but because of the way Elena told it, with confidence, with humor, with the self-assurance of someone who finally knew her own worth. "You were always beautiful, Elena," Rosa said. "The world is just finally catching up." Elena reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "Thank you, Ma, for never letting me believe I was less than I am." Rosa squeezed back. "That's what mothers do." But the world had a way of testing new foundations, and the test that was coming for Elena would challenge everything she had built, her confidence, her trust, and her heart. Because Dominic Conti was about to re-enter her life, and when he did, nothing would ever be the same. The Conti Foundation's annual Winter Gala was the kind of event that existed in a parallel universe from Elena's daily life. It was held at the River House, an exclusive event space on the East River with sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline, crystal chandeliers that scattered light like tiny galaxies, and a guest list that read like a who's who of Brooklyn's most powerful and influential. Business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and, though it was never spoken aloud, members of the Conti family's extensive network, all gathered under the pretense of celebrating community development. The 12 members of the Business Accelerator program were invited as guests of honor. Elena spent 3 days agonizing over what to wear. Diane, ever practical, had anticipated this and had arranged a shopping trip specifically for the occasion. They went to a boutique in Soho, where the salespeople spoke in hushed tones and the price tags made Elena's vision blur. "Diane, I can't afford this. The program covers it. This is part of professional development. Professional development doesn't usually involve a dress that costs more than my rent." Diane smiled. "Tonight it does." The dress they chose was simple but devastating, a deep emerald green, fitted with clean lines that emphasized Elena's figure without being ostentatious. She paired it with modest heels, small gold earrings, and her hair styled in loose waves that caught the light. When she looked at herself in the mirror of the boutique's fitting room, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Not because she had become someone else, but because she had finally become the version of herself that had been hiding all along. "There she is," Diane said softly from behind her. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I feel like I'm pretending." "You're not pretending. You're arriving." The night of the gala, Eleanor took a cab to the River House. She arrived alone. Rosa had encouraged her to go, insisting she would be fine for the evening. "Go, Elena, go and let them see you." The entrance was intimidating. A red carpet, actual photographers, people arriving in cars that cost more than Elena's apartment building. She stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, breathing before she straightened her shoulders and walked in. The room was magnificent. Hundreds of people mingled among round tables draped in white linen beneath chandeliers that cast a warm golden glow over everything. A jazz quartet played, softly in the corner. Waiters in black vests circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Eleanor took a glass of champagne and moved through the crowd, feeling simultaneously out of place and exactly where she was supposed to be. She found the other members of her cohort and they clustered together, sharing nervous laughter and observations about the crowd. "Is that the mayor?" whispered Derek, a 30-year-old aspiring tech entrepreneur. "Former mayor," corrected Priya, who was developing a health food delivery service. "Still, though," Derek said, eyes wide. Eleanor was laughing at something Priya said when she felt it, that sensation of being watched. Not the uncomfortable predatory gaze she had learned to recognize and deflect, but something different, something that felt like recognition. She turned slowly and scanned the room, and there, standing near the far wall with a glass of whiskey in his hand, surrounded by men in expensive suits who were clearly waiting for his attention, was Dominic Conti. She knew him immediately, not because she had followed his rise to power or seen his picture in the papers, though both were true. She knew him the way you know the melody of a song you haven't heard in 15 years, the shape of his face, the serious set of his jaw, the way he held himself with that particular stillness that she remembered from when they were children. He had always been still. Even as a boy, while other kids ran and screamed and flailed, Dominic had been still, watching, thinking, waiting. Their eyes met across the room, and the noise of the gala, the music, the conversation, the clinking of glasses, seemed to drop away. For a moment, it was just the two of them, connected by an invisible thread that stretched across 15 years and the vast distance between their lives. Elena's heart was hammering. She didn't know what to do. Should she go to him? Should she wait? Should she pretend she hadn't seen him? Before she could decide, he was moving toward her. The men around him parted without being told, sensing the shift in his attention. He walked through the crowd with the confidence of someone who owned the room, which, in a sense, he did, and stopped in front of her. Up close, he was both the boy she remembered and a complete stranger. The sharp features had matured into a face that was handsome in a way that felt almost dangerous. His dark eyes, which she remembered being full of quiet sadness, were now full of quiet authority. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been painted on, and a watch that probably cost more than Elena would earn in 10 years. But when he looked at her, his expression softened in a way that she suspected most people in this room had never seen. "Elena." He said her name like it was something precious, something he had been carrying carefully and was finally setting down. "Dominic." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. Inside, she was anything but steady. Long pause. The kind of pause that held entire conversations. "You look—" He paused, and for the first time that evening, the confident, controlled Dominic Conti seemed to struggle for words. "You look like yourself," he finished. "The real you." "You remember me?" she asked, and immediately felt foolish. Of course he remembered her. The look in his eyes made that unmistakably clear. "I never stopped," he said simply. They found a quiet corner of the terrace, away from the noise and the watching eyes. The night air was cold, but neither of them seemed to notice. They stood at the railing, looking out at the river, the lights of Manhattan reflected in the dark water below. "I looked for you," Elena said, "when we were kids. After you moved away, I came to your house and it was empty. No one would tell me where you went." "My father was taken away," Dominic said, his voice flat and controlled. "The family relocated. I was sent to live with an uncle in Staten Island. I wanted to say goodbye, but everything happened so fast, and then—" He trailed off, and in the silence Elena heard all the years they had lost. "I wrote you letters," she said. "I didn't have an address, so I just wrote them and kept them in a shoebox under my bed. Letters about school, about my mum, about the neighborhood, about how much I missed you." Something flickered across his face, a crack in the armor, brief but unmistakable. "I wish I had gotten them," he said quietly. They talked for over an hour. He told her about his life, the carefully edited version, the one that acknowledged the family business without naming its darker dimensions. She told him about hers, the struggles, the loneliness, the dreams she had nursed in secret. When she told him about the business plan, his eyes lit up with genuine admiration. "You always had the best ideas," he said. "Remember when you were going to open a library in Old Man Caruso's garage?" She laughed, a real, full laugh that made several nearby guests turn their heads. He was furious. I had already alphabetized half his tools before he caught us. For the first time in 15 years, Eleanor felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. Connection. Real, deep, uncomplicated connection with another human being. Dominic Conti, the man that half of Brooklyn feared and the other half courted, was looking at her like she was the most important person in the room. Not because of how she looked in her emerald dress or how her hair caught the light, but because of who she was, who she had always been. At some point during their conversation, Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and silenced it. "I have to attend to something. Business." He said the word with a particular weight. "But Elena, I want to see you again. Can I call you?" "You don't have my number." He smiled, a rare, small thing that transformed his entire face. "I'll get it. If you're wondering what's going to happen when these two worlds collide, drop a comment right now saying, 'Everyone deserves a second chance to be seen for who they really are.' I want to know if this story is hitting you the way it hit me." After he left, Elena stood on the terrace alone, the cold finally registering on her bare arms. She looked out at the river and felt something unfamiliar and wonderful, the sensation of being at the beginning of something rather than at the end. The world felt bigger tonight, full of possibility, full of the kind of hope that doesn't bounce. Inside, Dominic found Victor waiting by the bar. "You spoke with her," Victor said. "It wasn't a question." "I did." "And?" Dominic looked at his old friend with an expression that Victor had never seen before. It was the expression of a man who had just remembered what it felt like to be human. "She's extraordinary, Victor. She always was." Victor nodded slowly. "Be careful, Dominic. Your worlds are very different." "I know. And she doesn't know about the Foundation, about your involvement. I know that too. When she finds out, and she will find out, it could go very badly." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll make sure it goes well," he said. And with that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Victor to shake his head and mutter into his drink about the particular foolishness of powerful men who thought they could control everything. The days after the gala passed in a blur for Elena. She threw herself into the program with renewed energy, her business plan taking shape with a clarity and ambition that impressed everyone around her. James Holland, her mentor, told her she was the most naturally gifted strategist he had worked with in 30 years. She accepted the compliment with grace, something she was learning to do. Dominic called 3 days after the gala. The conversation was initially awkward, two adults trying to navigate the gap between childhood intimacy and present-day reality. But the awkwardness dissolved quickly, replaced by a natural, easy rhythm that surprised them both. They talked about everything and nothing. He asked about her mother, about the program, about her business plan. She asked about his life, carefully skirting the edges of what she knew, and what everyone in Brooklyn knew, about the Conti family. They began meeting for coffee, then dinner, then long walks along the waterfront, where the cold wind off the river turned their cheeks red, and their breath into clouds. Dominic was always a gentleman, attentive, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny in a dry, understated way. He never talked about his work in specific terms, and Eleanor, who was not naive, didn't push. She understood that there were parts of his life she was not privy to, and she accepted this with a pragmatism that came from growing up in a neighborhood where you learned to ask only the questions you wanted answered. What she didn't accept, what nagged at her with increasing insistence, was the coincidence of it all. The letter from the Conti Foundation arriving out of nowhere, the program that seemed tailor-made for her, the personal development package, the seed investment, the opportunity that had landed in her lap like a gift from an unseen benefactor. And then at the Foundation's own gala, running into Dominic Conti, who just happened to be the person she had been closest to as a child. Elena was intelligent. She connected dots for a living, and these dots were forming a picture she wasn't sure she liked. She brought it up on a Thursday evening in January, during dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, where the waiter called everyone sweetheart, and the pasta was made by a grandmother in the back. Dominic had ordered for both of them, not presumptively, but because he knew the menu and wanted to introduce her to the best dishes. They were eating carbonara and drinking red wine, and Elena was watching his face in the candlelight, working up the nerve to say what she needed to say. "Dominic." "Yes." "The Foundation, the program. Was that you?" He set his fork down slowly. He didn't look surprised, more like resigned, the way someone looks when they've been waiting for a question they knew was coming. "Yes," he said. No excuses, no deflection, just the truth. Eleanor felt the word land in her chest like a stone. She had suspected, but hearing it, confirmed, was different. Suspicion left room for doubt. Confirmation left room for nothing. "How much of it?" she asked. "All of it." She closed her eyes. The restaurant noise, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of other diners, the grandmother singing in the kitchen had seemed to recede. "Why?" "Because I promised you," he said. "When we were 9 years old, sitting on the steps of St. Anthony's, I promised you that no one would ever make you feel less than you are. I'm 15 years late, Elena, but I'm keeping my promise." She opened her eyes and looked at him. His expression was open in a way she had never seen, vulnerable, almost raw. The man who controlled an empire was sitting across from her with his heart in his hands, and he didn't look away. "You didn't owe me anything," she said, her voice tight. "This wasn't about debt." "Then what was it about?" "It was about you deserving a chance, a real chance. Not the scraps the world was willing to throw at you, but a real, genuine opportunity to become who you were meant to be. And how I look, the makeover, the clothes, the haircut, was that part of your plan too?" The personal development component was part of the program for all participants. What you did with it was entirely you, Elena. How you look right now, that confidence, that presence, I had nothing to do with that. That's all yours. She wanted to be angry. Part of her was angry. The independent, self-reliant part of her that had survived 23 years in South Brooklyn by relying on no one resented the idea that her transformation had been orchestrated by someone else. But another part of her, the honest, clear-eyed part, recognized the truth in what he was saying. He had opened a door. She had walked through it. The walking was hers. "I need time," she said, "to think about this. Take all the time you need. And I need you to be honest with me. About everything, not just this." The implication hung in the air between them. She was asking about more than the foundation. She was asking about who he really was, what his world really looked like, and whether there was any place in it for someone like her. Dominic looked at her for a long time, and then he nodded. "I will," he said. "Everything." They finished dinner in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable but was heavy with unspoken things. He drove her home, in a black SUV with a driver, which was another thing she was still getting used to, and walked her to the door of her building. They stood on the stoop in the cold January night, their breath mingling in the air between them. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Dominic." She went inside and climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment. Rosa was asleep. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator and the distant sound of a siren. Eleanor sat on her bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Gratitude, anger, affection, fear, trust, doubt. They twisted, together like roots beneath a tree, impossible to separate. She didn't sleep that night. The next few weeks were a period of deliberate distance. Eleanor continued the program but avoided the gala circuit and anything that might put her in Dominic's orbit. She needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own, that the woman she was becoming wasn't dependent on his patronage. She threw herself into her business plan with fierce dedication. She revised her financial models. She researched potential clients. She practiced her pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep, and she started networking on her own, using the skills the program had taught her to build connections that had nothing to do with the Conti name. The results were remarkable. Within weeks, she had secured meetings with 3 local businesses interested in her consulting services. She pitched with confidence and clarity, and 2 of them signed on as clients. It was a small start, but it was hers. Entirely hers. No strings, no favors, no handsome man in a charcoal suit pulling invisible strings. But even as she built her independence, she couldn't stop thinking about Dominic. Not just the man, the boy. The boy who had sat with her on church steps and promised to protect her. The boy who had disappeared without a goodbye and carried that guilt for 15 years. the boy who had grown into a man of enormous power and, despite everything, had used that power to give her a chance. One evening in early February, Eleanor was working late at the program's workspace. The other participants had gone home and the building was quiet except for the hum of the heating system and the occasional rumble of a truck on the street below. She was reviewing a financial projection when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know you need time, I respect that, but I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. Not because of what I did, because of what you're doing. D." She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Thank you, I'm proud of me too." And then, after another moment, "I don't need more time. Can we talk? In person?" His response was immediate. "Name the place." They met the next evening at the same Italian restaurant. This time, Elena arrived first. She was wearing jeans, a sweater and boots. No gala dress, no makeover armor. Just herself. When Dominic walked in, he looked different too, less armored. He wore a simple black coat over a dark sweater, and his face, usually so carefully composed, showed traces of nervousness that made him look suddenly younger, almost like the boy she remembered. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Elena said, "I have questions. I know. And I need honest answers, even if they're hard. I promised you honesty. I meant it." She took a breath. "Your family. What you do. I grew up in that neighborhood, Dominic. I know what the Conti name means. I'm not a child anymore. And I won't pretend I don't understand." He met her eyes. "What do you want to know? Are you the person they say you are? That depends on who's talking. Don't be evasive. Not with me." He leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human, so unguarded, that it caught her off guard. "I run a family business," he said carefully. "Some of that business operates in areas that are not conventional. I won't lie to you about that. But I'm not who the movies make us out to be. I don't hurt innocent people. I don't prey on the weak. The neighborhoods I operate in, I protect them, I invest in them. The foundation isn't a front, Elena. It's real. The programs are real. The people they help are real. And the other side? The side that isn't philanthropic? Exists, I won't deny it, but I'm working to change the balance. Every year, a larger portion of our operations moves into legitimate business, commercial real estate, construction, imports. It's a process, a slow one. But it's happening." Elena studied him. She was good at reading people. It was one of her gifts, and what she read in Dominic's face was not deception. It was the complicated, messy truth of a man born into a world he didn't choose, trying to navigate it with whatever integrity he could hold on to. "Why me?" she asked. "Why, after 15 years, did you come looking for me?" "Because you were the only person who ever saw me," he said. "Not the name, not the family. Me. And I spent 15 years becoming someone that the rest of the world was afraid of, and the whole time the only thing I wanted was to be seen like that again. The way you used to see me." The rawness of it took her breath away. This was not a powerful man performing vulnerability. This was a man stripped bare by truth, sitting in a restaurant with checkered tablecloths, telling a woman in a sweater that she was the most important person in his life. And she believed him. "I see you, Dominic," she said softly. "I still do." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and his hand was warm. "Then let me see you too," he said. "All of you. Not just the woman in the program or the girl from the neighborhood. Everything." "You already do," she said. And she meant it. That night marked the beginning of something new. Not a fairy tale, because fairy tales don't involve moral complexity and monthly payments on medical bills and the ever-present shadow of a world that operated by different rules. It was the beginning of a partnership. Two people damaged and determined in equal measure, choosing each other despite the 100 reasons they shouldn't. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor and Dominic built a relationship that was unlike anything either of them had experienced. They talked for hours, about philosophy, about business, about childhood memories, about the future. He introduced her to parts of his world that were legitimate and beautiful. A vineyard upstate that the family owned, a restaurant in Manhattan that served the best risotto she had ever tasted, a rooftop garden on one of his commercial properties where he grew tomatoes and basil because it reminded him of his grandmother. She introduced him to her world, the real one, without glamour or pretense. He ate Rosa's cooking and listened to her stories about the old country. He sat in the tiny apartment on Myrtle Avenue and helped Elena refine her business plan with suggestions that were both brilliant and practical. He never condescended. He never made her feel like his charity case. He treated her as an equal, and she rose to meet that expectation. But the world outside their growing bond was not so accommodating. Word had gotten around South Brooklyn that Elena Moretti, plain invisible Elena, had caught the attention of Dominic Conti, and in a neighborhood where the Conti name carried the weight of both power and danger, this development was greeted with a mixture of fascination, envy, and suspicion. Nico, Sal, and Tommy, the trio from the barbershop, were suddenly very interested in Elena's existence. The same men who had called her a ghost, who had mocked her appearance, who had treated her as less than nothing, were now tripping over themselves to be friendly. Nico showed up at the dry cleaning shop one morning with a coffee and a smile that was all teeth and no sincerity. "Hey, Elena. Looking good, as always. How you been?" She looked at him with an expression that was polite and utterly impenetrable. "I'm fine, Nico. Can I help you with something?" "Just wanted to say hi. We're friends, right? We go way back." "We're not friends, Nico. We're people who live on the same street. There's a difference." His smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Come on, Elena, don't be like that. I was always cool with you. You called me a ghost. You said I was forgettable. You told me to try harder because maybe I could be a 5. The words hung in the air between them, and Nico had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That was just, we were joking around. You know how it is." "I know exactly how it is," Elena said. "And I also know that the only reason you're standing here right now is because you heard a rumor about who I'm spending time with. If Dominic Conti hadn't looked twice at me, you'd still be calling me a ghost. So no, Nico, we're not friends, and we never will be." She went back to pressing shirts, and Nico slunk out of the shop with his coffee and his bruised ego. Elena's hands were shaking slightly, but her voice had been steady. Diane would have been proud. But the attention wasn't just from small-time neighborhood guys trying to ingratiate themselves. Marco Conti, Dominic's cousin and the family's underboss, had also taken notice. Marco was everything Dominic was not: loud, impulsive, flashy, and deeply resentful of his cousin's authority. He had always believed that he should be running the family, and he watched Dominic's every move with the jealous scrutiny of someone waiting for a weakness to exploit. Elena, in Marco's estimation, was that weakness. Marco Conti was 40 years old and looked like he was trying very hard to be 30. He wore his shirts open one button too many, drove a car that was one shade too red, and had a laugh that was always a beat too loud. He was not stupid. That was the dangerous thing about Marco. People underestimated him because of his flashiness, but beneath the gold chains and the expensive cologne was a mind that was cunning, patient, and completely without conscience. Marco first approached Elena at a community event in March, a neighborhood cleanup day organized by the Conti Foundation. She was there as a program participant, wearing jeans and a foundation t-shirt, picking up trash in a park with a group of volunteers. Marco appeared seemingly out of nowhere, dressed far too well for a park cleanup, and fell into step beside her. "You must be the famous Elena," he said, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth. "Marco Conti, Dominic's cousin." Elena shook his hand with polite caution. "Nice to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine. Dominic talks about you constantly. I had to see for myself what all the fuss was about." He looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl, though she kept her expression neutral. "And now I see it. You're quite the transformation story." The word transformation hit differently, coming from Marco. When Dominic used it, it felt like admiration. When Marco used it, it felt like a transaction, like he was calculating the before and after in terms of currency and leverage. "I'm just here to volunteer," Elena said, bending down to pick up a discarded can. "Me too," Marco said, though he made no move to pick up anything. "Family obligation. You know how it is. We Contis are very big on community." He said community the way some people say investment, with the implication that returns were expected. Over the following weeks, Marco made his presence known. He showed up at places Elena frequented: the coffee shop near the program workspace, the park where she sometimes ran in the mornings, even Rosa's neighborhood laundromat. Each time he was friendly, charming, and completely uninvited. Elena tolerated it at first, assuming it was simply a family member's curiosity. But when Marco began making comments that carried an undercurrent of threat, subtle, deniable, but unmistakable, she understood that his interest was not benign. "You know, Elena," he said one afternoon outside the coffee shop, "being close to Dominic has its benefits, but it also has its risks. People in our world, they watch, they judge, and they make decisions based on what they see." "Is that a warning?" Elena asked, her voice calm even as her heart rate spiked. Marco shrugged, all innocence. "Just friendly advice, from one concerned family member to another." Elena told Dominic about the encounters that evening. They were at his penthouse, and she watched his face carefully as she spoke. His expression didn't change, not in any way that most people would notice. But Elena wasn't most people. She saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers curled almost imperceptibly around the arm of his chair, the flash of something cold and dangerous in his eyes that was there and gone in an instant. "He won't bother you again," Dominic said. His voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely certain. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to have a conversation with my cousin, a conversation he won't enjoy. Dominic, I don't want to be the cause of a family conflict." He turned to her, and his expression softened. "You're not the cause of anything, Elena. Marco has been testing boundaries for years. This is just the latest excuse." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I told you I'd make sure nobody made you feel unsafe. I meant it, then and now." The conversation Dominic had with Marco took place behind closed doors at the family's office in Bay Ridge. Victor was present, as was Dominic's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Ross, who had been navigating the legal complexities of the Conti operations for a decade. What was said in that room stayed in that room, but the result was immediate and visible. Marco stopped appearing in Elena's daily life. He didn't vanish. He was still present at family events, still held his position, but he retreated behind a line that had been clearly and firmly drawn. However, Marco was not the type to accept correction gracefully. He retreated, but he seethed. And in his seething, he began to plan. The plan took shape slowly over the course of several weeks. Marco, through his own network of associates, began spreading information, not to the authorities, which would have been a violation of the family code that even he wouldn't dare, but to competitors, rival organizations who would benefit from knowing about the Conti family's business dealings, about shipments and transactions, and the details that made the difference between a successful operation and a catastrophe. The first sign of trouble came in April, when a routine business deal fell through under suspicious circumstances. Then a warehouse in Red Hook was raided by federal agents acting on what appeared to be an anonymous tip. Then a key business partner in New Jersey abruptly severed ties, citing concerns about exposure. Each incident was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern that Victor identified first. "Someone is leaking information," Victor told Dominic during an emergency meeting at the penthouse, "systematically from inside the organization." "Marco," Dominic said. It wasn't a question. "I don't have proof, yet, but the pattern fits. Only someone at his level would have access to the specific details that have been compromised." Dominic stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, glittering and indifferent. "Find the proof," he said. and find it fast. The crisis consumed Dominic's attention for weeks. He became distant, not intentionally, but inevitably. His phone calls to Elena became shorter, more distracted. Their dinners were cancelled or cut short. He apologized each time, and she could see the genuine regret in his eyes. But the distance hurt nonetheless. Elena, for her part, channeled her energy into her work. Her consulting business was gaining momentum. She had secured 5 clients and was generating enough revenue to cover her basic expenses. She had moved her mother to a slightly larger apartment in a better building, still in the neighborhood, but with a working elevator and a landlord who actually maintained the property. Rosa's health was stabilizing with better medical care, paid for by Elena's growing income and a discreet arrangement that Dominic had made with one of the city's top pulmonologists, an arrangement Elena didn't know about and that Dominic intended to tell her about when the time was right. But the time kept not being right, because Marco's sabotage was escalating and the walls were closing in. The crisis reached its peak on a Wednesday evening in late April. Elena was at her new office, a small but professional space in a co-working building in downtown Brooklyn, when she received a phone call from Victor. His voice was tense and urgent in a way she had never heard before. "Elena, listen carefully. I need you to go home right now. Don't stop anywhere. Go directly to your apartment and stay there." "Victor, what's happening?" "Dominic will explain. But right now, I need you safe. Can you do that?" "Yes, of course." "Thank you. And Elena, lock your door." She went home, her mind racing. She called Dominic, but got his voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted. No response. For 3 hours, she sat in her apartment with her phone in her hand, waiting. Rosa, sensing her daughter's anxiety, made tea and sat with her in the kitchen, holding her hand without asking questions. That was Rosa's gift, knowing when to speak and when to simply be present. At 11:30 that night, there was a knock on the door. Elena looked through the peephole and saw Dominic. She opened the door, and he stepped inside, and she could see immediately that something had happened. He looked exhausted, not just tired, but worn down in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and there was a tension in his body that made him look like a spring wound too tight. "Dominic, what happened?" He looked at Rosa, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, and then back at Elena. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" Rosa, understanding, retreated to her room with a gentle nod. Elena led Dominic to the small living area. They sat on the couch, and for a long moment he said nothing. He just sat there, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. Elena had never seen him like this. The man who was always composed, always in control, always 3 steps ahead, looked like someone who had just lost everything. "Marco has been working against me," he said finally, "for months, leaking information to competitors and to people who would use it against the family. Tonight, one of our key operations was compromised, badly. It's going to take months to recover." "Are you in danger?" Elena asked. "Not the kind you're thinking. This isn't about physical safety, it's about trust, about the foundation of everything I've built. If I can't trust my own family, then the whole structure becomes unstable." Elena reached over and took his hand. "What are you going to do?" He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she recognized from a long time ago. The look of a boy sitting on church steps, overwhelmed by a world that was too big and too cruel. "I don't know," he said. And those 3 words, from a man who always knew, cost him more than anything else that had happened that night. Elena held his hand tighter. "Then we'll figure it out together." He stayed for an hour, and they talked, not about strategy or plans, but about the kind of things you talk about when the world is falling apart, and you need to remember why it's worth holding together. They talked about the church steps, about peanut butter sandwiches, about the library in Old Man Caruso's garage. They talked about what it meant to be seen by someone, truly seen, and how rare and precious that was. When he left, standing on the stoop in the cold spring air, He cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person who had ever lived. "You are the best thing in my life, Eleanor," he said. "The only thing that makes sense." "Then don't shut me out," she said. "No matter what happens, don't disappear on me again." "Never," he said. "I promise." And this time she believed him completely. The resolution of the Marco situation came 2 weeks later, not with dramatic confrontation, but with the cold, methodical precision that characterized Dominic at his most effective. Victor gathered the proof: electronic communications, financial records, testimony from associates who had been coerced into Marco's scheme and were now willing to tell the truth in exchange for protection. Dominic presented the evidence to the family's senior members in a meeting that lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Marco was removed from his position and exiled from the family's operations. Not violently, Dominic was explicit about that, but completely. Marco was given a choice: accept a comfortable but anonymous life far from Brooklyn, or face the consequences of his betrayal through the family's internal justice system. Marco chose exile. He left for Miami the following week, and the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the damage Marco had done was real, and repairing it consumed Dominic for months. During this time, Elena became not just his emotional anchor, but his strategic partner. Her business mind, her ability to analyze problems and find creative solutions, proved invaluable. She helped him restructure the family's legitimate operations, creating more transparent systems and building relationships with partners who had been spooked by the security breach. She did this not as a subordinate or a favor seeker, but as an equal, bringing her own expertise to the table and earning the respect of people who had initially dismissed her as a temporary romantic interest. Victor watched this transformation, not of Elena's appearance, which had long since settled into a natural, effortless elegance, but of her role, with quiet admiration. "She's extraordinary," he told Dominic one afternoon. Dominic smiled. "I know. I've known since I was 9. A year had passed since Elena received the letter from the Conti Foundation. In that time, she had become someone that the people who once dismissed her could not reconcile with their memories. Her consulting business, which she had named Moretti Strategies, had grown from a one-woman operation in a co-working space to a proper firm with 3 employees and an office in a converted brownstone in Clinton Hill. She specialized in helping small businesses in underserved communities develop sustainable growth strategies, and her client list had expanded to include not just local shops and restaurants, but community organizations, and even a few city-funded initiatives. Her reputation was growing beyond South Brooklyn. A profile in a local business magazine described her as one of the most innovative young consultants in the borough. An invitation to speak at a Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce event led to more invitations, more connections, more opportunities. Eleanor was becoming, in the truest sense of the word, a force. But what made her remarkable, what set her apart from the dozens of other smart, ambitious young professionals climbing the ladder, was something that couldn't be taught in any program or bought with any investment. It was her authenticity. Eleanor had been transformed, yes, but she had not been replaced. The woman who now commanded rooms with her presence and her intelligence was the same woman who had pressed shirts at a dry cleaning shop, who had eaten soup and sandwiches at a kitchen table with her mother, who had written unsent letters to a friend she thought she'd lost forever. The transformation hadn't erased who she was. It had revealed it. Dominic saw this more clearly than anyone. Their relationship had deepened over the months, moving past the initial intensity of reunion into something more settled and sustaining. They argued sometimes. Elena was not afraid to challenge him, and Dominic, who was accustomed to people deferring to him, found this both infuriating and irresistible. She pushed him to be better, to think bigger about the legitimate side of his business, to invest in the community not as a power play, but as a genuine commitment to the people who lived there. And he pushed her to dream bigger, to take risks, to stop playing small because the world had once made her feel small. They were, in the estimation of virtually everyone who knew them, perfectly matched. Two people who had been shaped by the same world but had walked different paths through it, and who had found in each other the missing piece that made everything else make sense. But Elena was not interested in being defined by her relationship. She had worked too hard and come too far to be Dominic Conti's girlfriend. She was Elena Moretti, founder of Moretti Strategies, daughter of Rosa, native of South Brooklyn, survivor and thriver. And the world was beginning to take notice. The moment that crystallized everything, the moment that brought the full circle from despised to undeniable, came on a warm evening in June, at an event that Elena had organized herself. It was the launch party for Moretti Strategies' new community initiative, a free financial literacy program for young people in South Brooklyn, funded in part by a grant Elena had written and secured on her own, and in part by private donations from supporters who believed in her vision. The event was held outdoors, in the same park where Elena had volunteered for the clean-up day, where Marco had first approached her, with his calculated charm. The park had been transformed for the occasion. String lights hung between the trees, tables were set with food from local restaurants, and a small stage had been erected where Elena would speak. The guest list included community leaders, local business owners, program alumni, journalists, and, standing in the back, trying not to attract attention, Dominic Conti. Elena stood backstage, if you could call the area behind a portable curtain backstage, and reviewed her notes. She was nervous, not terrified the way she would have been a year ago, but nervous in the healthy, productive way that meant she cared about getting it right. Diane had taught her that nerves weren't the enemy. They were the engine. Use them, Diane always said. Let them make you sharper. Elena took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her dress, a simple, elegant blue that Rosa had helped her choose, and stepped onto the stage. The crowd was larger than she had expected. 50, maybe 60 people, plus passers-by who had stopped to see what was happening. She saw familiar faces, Rosa in the front row, beaming, James Holland, her mentor, standing near the drinks table, Priya and Derek from the program cohort, cheering her on, and in the very back, half hidden by a tree, Dominic, watching her with an expression that was pride and love, and something else she couldn't name. She also saw, standing near the edge of the crowd, Nico, Sal, and Tommy. They had shown up, uninvited, drawn by curiosity or guilt or some combination of both. Elena noticed them, and for a fraction of a second, the old feelings surged, the shame, the invisibility, the desperate wish to be seen. But the surge passed quickly, replaced by something steady and unshakable. She was past them, not above them. She would never think of herself as above anyone, but past them, in the way that a river is past the rocks it has already flowed over. She stepped to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. The park was bathed in the golden light of early evening, the string lights beginning to glow as the sun sank behind the buildings. She could smell cut grass and someone's barbecue, and the faint, sweet scent of Rosa's perfume from the front row. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Elena began. "I want to tell you a story. A year ago, I was working at a dry cleaning shop 6 blocks from this park. I was earning $8.50 an hour. I was living in an apartment, with a shower that worked half the time, and I was invisible. Not in any metaphysical sense, I was literally invisible. I walked down the streets of this neighborhood every day, and people looked right through me. Some of them are here tonight." She didn't look at Nico, but she didn't need to. The silence in the crowd told her the message had landed. "I'm not telling you this to make anyone feel bad," she continued. "I'm telling you because it matters. It matters because there are people in this neighborhood, young people especially, who feel the same way right now. Invisible, overlooked. Like the world has already decided who they are and what they're worth, and there's nothing they can do to change it. I'm here to tell you that's wrong. That feeling is real, but the conclusion is wrong. You are not what the world sees when it glances at you. You are not the labels people stick on you. You are not the limitations others impose on you. You are what you decide to be. And deciding, really deciding with everything you have, is the most powerful thing a human being can do." She talked about the program, about financial literacy, about the concrete tools that young people would have access to. She talked about the businesses that had partnered with the initiative, about the volunteers who would serve as mentors. She talked about Rosa, who had taught her that dignity was not something you earned, but something you carried, and that no amount of hardship could take it from you. When she mentioned Rosa's name, the older woman wiped her eyes and mouthed, "I love you." And then Elena said something that silenced the entire crowd. "I want to be clear about something. The woman standing in front of you tonight, I didn't become her because someone gave me new clothes or a new haircut. Those things helped. They opened doors. But the person who walked through those doors was always here. She was here when she was pressing shirts. She was here when she was eating soup in a tiny kitchen. She was here when she was writing business plans at midnight on a bed in a room the size of a closet. She was always here. The only thing that changed is that I stopped letting other people's vision, or lack of vision, define my reality. And I stopped waiting for permission to be extraordinary." The applause was immediate and sustained. Eleanor felt it wash over her like warm water, not with vanity, but with gratitude. This was the moment, not the gala, not the emerald dress, not the look in Dominic's eyes. This park, this neighborhood, these people, this was where her story meant something. After the speech, the crowd mingled, and Elena circulated among them with an ease that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She accepted compliments graciously, deflected praise toward her team, and made sure Rosa had a comfortable chair and a plate of food. She was in the middle of a conversation with a journalist from a local paper when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned and found herself face to face with Nico. He looked different, smaller somehow, less sure of himself. He was wearing a decent button-down shirt, like he had actually made an effort, and his usual smirk was nowhere to be seen. "Elena," he said, "can I talk to you for a second?" She hesitated, then nodded. They stepped away from the crowd, near the park's iron fence, where the noise of the party faded slightly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," Nico said. The words came out awkwardly, like they weren't accustomed to being in his mouth. "For everything. The stuff I said, the way we treated you, it was wrong. I know that. I knew it then, too. I was trying to be tough, trying to fit in with the guys. That's not an excuse. But it's the truth." Elena studied him. She saw a young man who was not so different from who she had been. Someone trapped by other people's expectations, playing a role he hadn't chosen because he didn't know there were other options. "Thank you, Nico," she said. "I appreciate you saying that. You don't have to forgive me. I just needed you to know. I heard you, and I do forgive you. But I want you to know something. The person you hurt, the girl you called a ghost, she was always more than what you saw. And so are you. If you're really sorry, don't just tell me. Show the next person you meet, the one who looks like they're invisible. See them." Nico blinked, and for a moment, his tough guy facade crumbled completely. He looked like he might actually cry, but he pulled himself together with a sharp breath and nodded. "Yeah, okay, I will." He turned and walked away, and Elena watched him go with a mixture of compassion and something that felt like closure. Not the dramatic, cathartic closure of movies and novels, the quiet, real kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply settles into your bones like warmth. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the string lights swayed gently in the warm June breeze, Eleanor found Dominic sitting on a bench at the far end of the park. He had stayed through the entire event, keeping his distance, letting her have her night. She sat down beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I just ran a marathon and won." He laughed, a real laugh, full and warm. "You did, and you didn't even break a sweat." "I was drenched in sweat, Dominic. I just hide it well." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the city settling into night. A dog barked somewhere. A car horn honked. The distant rumble of the subway vibrated through the ground beneath them. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Elena said. "What?" "Those church steps, St. Anthony's. You and me, 9 years old, the whole world ahead of us, and we had no idea." "I had some idea," he said. Even then. What do you mean? He turned to look at her, and in the soft glow of the string lights, his face held an expression she had never seen before. Not vulnerability, not the calculated warmth he showed the world, but something entirely unguarded. Peace. I mean that even when I was 9 years old, sitting on those steps with peanut butter on my face, I knew that you were going to be important. I didn't know how. I didn't know what we'd become or where life would take us, but I knew. I knew with the certainty of a kid who hasn't learned to doubt yet, and I was right. Elena felt her throat tighten. You can't just say things like that and expect me to function normally. I'm not interested in you functioning normally. I'm interested in you being exactly who you are. She turned and kissed him, right there on the park bench, in the neighborhood where she had grown up invisible, in the park where she had just told 60 people that invisibility was a lie. And if anyone in the surrounding buildings happened to look out their window at that moment, they would have seen something beautiful and simple and true. Two people who had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again sitting on a bench in the fading light, holding on. The months that followed were good ones. Moretti Strategies continued to grow. Elena hired 2 more consultants, both from the program's alumni network, and expanded her services to include workshops and community speaking engagements. She was invited to join the advisory board of the Conti Foundation, this time with full knowledge of the family connection and full transparency about her relationship with Dominic. She accepted on the condition that her role would be substantive, not ceremonial, and she proceeded to revolutionize the Foundation's approach to community development with a pragmatic efficiency that left the other board members alternately impressed and exhausted. Rosa's health improved significantly. The new apartment, the better medical care, and, perhaps most importantly, the reduction in worry and stress that came from watching her daughter flourish, all contributed to a stability that Rosa hadn't known in years. She started volunteering at the church, helping with the after-school program that Elena's initiative had funded. She told everyone who would listen about her daughter, showing pictures on the phone Elena had bought her, beaming with a pride that was as bright as a spotlight. Dominic, influenced by Elena and by his own evolving sense of purpose, accelerated the transition of the family's operations toward legitimate business. He invested heavily in real estate development, focusing on affordable housing in neighborhoods that had been neglected by conventional developers. He established a scholarship fund for students from South Brooklyn, and he made a decision that shocked the old guard of the family but that he had been considering for years. He stepped back from the shadowy operations entirely, passing that responsibility to a trusted associate who shared his vision of eventual dissolution. It wasn't a clean break. These things never are. The Conti name carried weight that couldn't be shed like a coat, and there were people in the world who would always associate that name with its darker history. But Dominic was building something new. For himself, for Eleanor, for the future he was beginning to imagine. A future that included a life that didn't require Victor to run background checks, and that didn't end with the kind of stories that made the evening news. One afternoon in September, almost exactly a year after the gala where they had reunited, Dominic took Elena to St. Anthony's Church. The old neighborhood had changed. Some of the buildings she remembered had been torn down, others renovated beyond recognition. But the church was the same. The stone steps where they had sat as children were worn smooth by decades of footsteps, but they were still there, solid and patient. They sat on the steps, just as they had 20 years ago. The late afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and the street was quiet in that particular way that certain Brooklyn blocks achieved on lazy Sundays. "I brought you here for a reason," Dominic said. "If you're about to propose on church steps, I should warn you that I'm going to need a better ring than a gumball machine can provide." He laughed. "I'll keep that in mind for the future. But today, I brought you here for something else." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn shoebox. Eleanor recognized it immediately. Her breath caught. "Dominic, she's that—" "Victor found it. In the old apartment before it was cleared out. It had your name on it." She took the box with trembling hands and opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, written in the careful, earnest handwriting of a girl between the ages of 9 and 14. Letters addressed to Dominic, with no last name and no address. Letters about school, about Rosa, about the neighborhood, about missing him, about hoping he was okay wherever he was. Elena held the box and cried. Not the elegant single-tear crying of movies, real crying. The kind that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name. Dominic put his arm around her and held her, just as he had when they were children, and said nothing, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply be there while they feel. When the tears subsided, she wiped her eyes and laughed. "I can't believe you found these." "I read them," he admitted. "All of them." "That's mortifying." "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever read. A girl writing letters to a friend she lost, never giving up hope that somehow, someday, they would find each other again." He paused. She was right, by the way. That girl. She was right about everything. Eleanor leaned against him, the shoebox in her lap, the late sun warming their faces. She thought about the journey, from invisibility to presence, from despair to purpose, from the girl nobody wanted to the woman nobody could ignore. She thought about the people who had dismissed her, and the people who had believed in her. She thought about Rosa, who had never stopped seeing her, about Diane, who had taught her to see herself, about James, who had seen her potential, and about Dominic, who had seen her first and had crossed 15 years and a universe of difference to find her again. She thought about the title of the story of her life, the one she would tell anyone who asked. They despised her looks, until the most powerful man in the city saw her again. And when he did, it wasn't her transformation that stunned everyone. It was the realization that she had been extraordinary all along. The world just hadn't been paying attention. "Dominic?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For the program, for the foundation, for finding the letters, for all of it. You don't have to thank me. Everything you've become, you did yourself. I know, I'm thanking you anyway, because you opened the door. And even though I walked through it, on my own, the fact that you cared enough to open it, that matters. It matters more than you know." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Then you're welcome." They sat on the church steps until the sun went down and the street lights flickered on, one by one, turning the old neighborhood into a constellation of warm golden lights. And Elena thought, this is what it feels like. Not the transformation, not the success, not the validation. This, sitting in the place where you started, with someone who knew you before the world tried to tell you who you were, and feeling, for the first time in your life, completely, utterly, unapologetically seen. The story of Elena Moretti didn't end on those church steps. It was, in many ways, just beginning. Her business would grow. Her relationship with Dominic would deepen. Her mother would dance at her wedding, slowly, carefully, but with a joy that lit up the room. And the young people she mentored, the businesses she built, the community she served, they would carry her legacy forward, each one a testament to the truth she had discovered and the truth she lived by every single day. You are not what the world sees when it glances at you. You are what you decide to be. And deciding, really deciding with everything you have, is the most powerful thing a human being can do. If you watched all the way to the end, it's because you loved this story. Drop a comment saying, "I watched until the end so I can get to know you," and find out who really loves the stories on this channel. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, smash that like button to support the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. Sometimes the person next to you is feeling invisible, and this story might be the light they need. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell, because here we tell real stories that change the way you see the world and the way you see yourself. See you in the next video.